No.
All right, I'll just say, I brought the position to our board asking if we could bring the position to the New York Convention. And I also recommended that we reach out to other local leagues and send the position to them so they had a chance to look it over before they submitted their recommendations to the board. And so then the board agreed, and Barb and I worked to put together all the materials to send to the state in time by the deadline, and also forward it to other leagues. And so I'm really looking at tonight as a practice run for the New York Convention session that I'll be doing for the delegates on Tuesday, June 8th at 7:30 to 9. It's kind of late for me. I'm hoping my brain will still be ticking that late at night, but so your feedback is much appreciated tonight. So probably it'll be better for you to just jot down notes. I did build into this like some moments to pause and ask if there's any questions so that, you know, if something's not clear, we can find that out. But I did number all the slides. So if there's a particular slide, you can write down the number of the slide. So let's do that. I'm going to go to the shared screen. And there it is, slideshow. I want to go into slideshow mode. Okay, I'm going to stop my video just so that I can not think you're looking at me. I'm going to get rid of the admit. All right, so the concurrence with the California League of Women Voters criminal justice position is part of the League of Women Voters of New York State proposed 2021-2023 program.
You can't have two things.
Can people mute? I'm hearing voices. The official business of the convention is going to be held in the two plenary sessions. Friday, June 11th at 5:30 to 9 is the opening session. And then Saturday, June 12th at 1 to 5 is the second session. And that is when the program will be adopted. That's when delegates will vote. Okay, so this happened again. Now it's not forwarding. This happened when I did my presentation recently. For some reason, when I go into this,
hit escape.
Yeah, it doesn't want to, well, it doesn't even want to escape. Oh, we tested it and everything. Isn't that weird? Okay, this is highlighting more.
Click on your view options, move exit full screen if you're in full screen, and then hit escape again.
All right.
You see the lower left of your screen on the bottom there with all your doohickeys? See if those work.
Show presenter view, screen, and show?
Yeah, and then start it again.
All right, let's try this. I think it's something with Zoom, because it, okay, let's try, please. Yay! Thank you, Monica. All right.
You're welcome.
So I wanted to just make sure everybody understood the program planning recommendations process. Sometimes people don't understand that. So every year leading up to convention, the League of Women Voters of New York asks local leagues for their input in developing state league program for the 2 years following the convention. Program really means positions. So this is the time to determine which positions we want to keep, delete, update or revise, or even consider new studies for new positions or concurrence with existing positions of other leagues. Concurrence is the act of agreeing with a statement position. And local leagues had a March 1st deadline for submitting suggestions for them to be considered by delegates at convention. Ah. Yeah, it's not going again. Oh, Maybe I'm gonna just have to get out of this full view and not do it in the slide view form. You know, you can read that still, right?
Yes, it's fine.
It's not as big, but at least I know it's going to still work if I stay like this. All right. So then the board reviewed the program recommendations submitted by 28 local leagues and recommended a concurrence at convention with the California League of Women Voters criminal justice position. Article 10, Section 3B of the New York State bylaws provides a process for local leagues to propose the adoption of a state league position at an annual meeting by concurrence with the position of another league. The Saratoga League submitted a proposal for concurrence at convention with the League of Women Voters California position on criminal justice that met the requirements of the bylaws. After consideration of the materials submitted by Saratoga and the support of this concurrence by 13 additional leagues, the board recommends that delegates approve the adoption of the League of Women Voters California position on criminal justice. As part of a board recommended program, the concurrence only requires a majority vote of delegates to be adopted. Now, at convention, there'll be adoption of the program, and there are going to be some proposed convention rules, which will happen at the opening plenary. And in the proposed convention rules that's put forth by the state league, they have this listed: adoption of program. A, action on the proposed program, concurrence proposals, and any non-recommended program items voted for consideration by the delegates and moved for adoption shall take place at a time designated by the chair. Proposals for concurrence are debatable but not amendable. So that's important. This concurrence can be debated but not amended as listed in the proposed convention rules. Because it is proposed, a majority vote is required, as I said earlier. If there are non-recommended items, a 3/5 vote is required for adoption. Now, amendments to wording for editorial purposes, clarification, or emphasis may be made at this point, but may not change the scope or meaning of the item. So like if there's some word that somebody thinks would be a better word. Personally, I like it to just be passed without any changes, and then you can always do housekeeping down the line. All right. First, some background from the League of Women Voters California on their criminal justice position. The role of the criminal justice system is to prevent crime and promote public safety. Current research indicates successful systems focus on rehabilitation and support to prevent recidivism. However, some communities experience excessive force and surveillance by the police. Other individuals waste away in prison serving sentences far out of proportion to their offenses. A growing national bipartisan consensus exists that the current criminal justice system needs reform to ensure its constitutionality and cost effectiveness. A League of Women Voters of California task force reviewed criminal justice positions from state and local leagues across the country. Based on that research, they drafted this criminal justice position so that local leagues can educate their communities on best practices that will ensure safety and justice for all, and so that the League of Women Voters of California can advocate for against proposed criminal justice legislation at the state level. So they looked at a lot of different positions to come up with this comprehensive position that we're going to be looking at to concur with. The rationale that Barb and I submitted to the State League is the following. This past summer, in the wake of George Floyd's death and the loss of many other Black and brown lives at the hands of law enforcement, Governor Andrew Cuomo signed Executive Order 203, establishing the New York State Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative. The executive order called for each municipality in the state to convene a task force to make recommendations for changes to a local legislative body in time for consideration and adoption by April 1st, 2021. Inspired by the Legal Women Voters New York DEI task force, many of us are participating in the executive order charge by giving input as private citizens, examining existing approaches to public safety, and providing avenues for stakeholders to express their views. This proposed criminal justice position concurrence is in line with the June 2020 League of Women Voters US call for congressional action on police violence. Quote, LWVUS joined a letter with over 400 civil rights organizations calling on Congress to implement needed policing reforms. The letter urges congressional leadership to swiftly rectify the legacy of white supremacy and anti-Black racism that has led to police violence against Black people across the country. The letter is long, so I'm not going to read it right now, but I do have the link right here in this slide if we want to go back and look at it later. Before we get into looking at the position, I'm going to pause here to see if there's anything that is unclear up to this point. I guess somebody could just turn off their mic or raise their hand, or I don't know. I can't see anybody, so I dare not go out of the screen share for fear. Does anybody have, or is there something in the chat? Let's look. Hooray for the dress rehearsal. Now I'm seeing the chat. All right.
No,
So
nothing.
I'll continue unless there's a question.
Lori, I have one technical question. Is
Yes.
it likely that I haven't been to the convention before? I'm a newbie. Is
Ah,
it likely that the rules will be adopted as expected? I mean,
yes.
okay, so we don't need to worry about at the very beginning. The rules will change. Okay.
I would say yes. I can't recall any time recently. I think at the national convention, there's more likelihood for people to challenge the proposed convention rules, but at the state level, I don't
Good.
think that has happened usually.
That's very encouraging. Thank you very much.
Sure. All right, so let's look at the position in brief. I changed California to New York, but otherwise this is the complete California position in brief. The League of Women Voters New York supports a criminal justice system that is just, effective, equitable, transparent, and that fosters public trust at all stages, including policing practices, pretrial procedures, sentencing, incarceration, and reentry. The elimination of systematic bias, including the disproportionate policing and incarceration of marginalized communities. Policing practices that promote safety for both law enforcement officers and the communities they serve. Collaboration between government and community throughout every stage of the criminal justice system. A focus on humane treatment and rehabilitation with the goal of promoting the successful reentry into communities of those who have been incarcerated, and reliance on evidence-based research in decision-making about law enforcement programs and policies, including scheduled periodic audits of program and policy effectiveness. Now, in the criminal justice position, there are 6 categories. And these are the definitions that California gives for these 6 categories. Policing practices, constitutional policies and procedures established by law enforcement with input from the communities they serve. Pretrial procedures, actions taken after an individual has been arrested, which embody the constitutional presumption of innocence. Sentencing, Judgment made after an individual has been declared to be guilty. Incarceration. Policies and procedures that apply to employees of and incarcerated individuals in local jails and state prisons. Reentry. Programs in place during and after incarceration to help individuals become successful members of their communities. And general. Statements which apply to some or all of the above categories. So next we are going to get into the details of these 6 categories with slides 11 through 22. Are we good to go? I think we're good to go. Unless somebody wants to take off their mic and stop me before I get into the details.
No, we're good.
We're good, all right. We're getting into the nitty gritty now. All right, details, policing practices. We have 4 slides that cover policing practices. Ensure that crime prevention and promotion of public safety are the primary roles of state and local law enforcement agencies. Build public trust and positive community relationships through police engagement with community members. Encourage community participation in the development of policing policy. Provide police accountability via independent citizen oversight of law enforcement and publicly available data on officer conduct. Disseminate information to the public about policing policies, recruitment, procedures for compliant commendation, and the rights and responsibilities of citizens and officers in interactions with each other. Provide sufficient psychological services and counseling to meet stress-related needs of police personnel. Staff police departments to reflect the diversity of the communities they serve and establish recruitment efforts that reflect this principle. Train police to identify individuals with mental health conditions, disabilities, or substance abuse addiction, so that officers will request support from appropriate medical and mental health professionals with the goal of diverting those individuals into treatment instead of jail. Require all officers to render first aid to people who have been injured as a result of police action. Conduct comprehensive background checks to include such history as PTSD, domestic violence, sex offenses, and affiliations with domestic terrorist groups for all applicants to law enforcement positions. Establish de-escalation, the use of time, distance, communications, and available resources whenever it is safe to do so, and anti-bias training, and ensure that all staff are provided with this training. And last, authorize minimal use of force during police encounters with the public and consider deadly force only when necessary to prevent imminent death or serious bodily injury. So that's pretty comprehensive under police practices.
Lori, I have a question.
Yeah.
Because I know that one of the leagues that we had sent the position to raised the point that because we have civil service rules, it may be difficult to actually hire police who reflect the diversity of our communities. What do you think?
So actually at the end of the slide presentation, I do talk about that. Do you want me to just go to it now or do it last?
You can do it last, it's all right.
All right, so we are going to address, there were 2 concerns raised by one league, and we will address those. So one of those was about hiring a diverse police force. So I'll get to that. Thank you. All right, second category, we have 2 slides for the details of pretrial procedures. Ensure no person suffers discrimination before the law due to their economic status, nor should they be subject to risk assessment tools which can produce biased outcomes. I have that underlined because I do have that defined. That's one word I added to the terms that were sent to all the leagues. And we can look at that, or if anybody needed to know what that is. Provide adequate numbers of public defenders to defend indigent accused. Provide prosecutors, defense attorneys, court counselors, and judges with regular training on alternatives to incarceration, including pretrial diversion and restorative justice practices. I started going through and underlining the words that are in the terminology, but then I stopped. So that's why some of these words are underlined. But we do have those words defined later. Pretrial procedures continued. We have recognized that mental health conditions and substance abuse addictions are public health issues, not crimes. Implement the use of specialty courts, e.g. drug treatment courts and restorative justice programs. Consider community-based treatment programs and other alternatives to incarceration when appropriate. So that is all of the pretrial procedure details. Sentencing. 2 items. Consider the individual circumstances of the person charged and nature of the crime rather than mandatory minimum sentences. Consider split sentencing and/or alternatives to incarceration when appropriate. Incarceration, we have 3 slides. Ensure that all correctional systems provide humane, dignified, non-discriminatory treatment of incarcerated people and personnel, including appropriate health care and access to community-based rehabilitation programs. Eliminate the practice of solitary confinement. This was actually another item that was brought up by a local league, so we'll talk about solitary confinement later. Ensure that incarcerated people and corrections officers have clear, safe, and accessible ways to report abuse.
Lori, can I ask
Yeah.
about split sentencing? What is that?
Sure, let me tell you what that is. I have it right here. Split sentencing is an arrangement where a defendant is ordered to a specific term of incarceration and then a period of post-release mandatory supervision by the probation department.
Ah,
Okay. I can't remember if I read the first one or not. Did I? Yes, I think I did. Adapt case management services to match education, behavior, job training, work, and mental health programs with the needs of incarcerated individuals. And then the last slide under incarceration, provide sufficient psychological services, including training and evaluation to meet the needs of corrections officers. Encourage family and community visitations and ways to maintain contact. Eliminate private prisons until space in public prisons is available. Ensure that private prisons comply with all the standards for state-run jails. Now, we do not have private prisons in New York State. So this is an item that we don't necessarily need to have in the position worded like this, but this is something that could be cleaned up after, if the concurrence is passed. Just, you know, change it from eliminate private prisons to never have or something, you know. But it's not bad to have it in here in the event that somebody tried to bring in a private prison.
Lori,
Yeah.
is there going to be somewhere down the road a financial discussion with some of these provisions, with all of these provisions?
There's absolutely no financial discussion with these provisions.
That's a problem. Let me wonderful provisions. I'm not anti this at all, but this is not going to come free. And while I can think of a number of communities that could and should easily afford this, I can think of a number of communities which would be very strapped to have to institute this plethora of provisions.
Well, I think that we have to understand that this position is our position of what we would believe in so that we could lobby for things. It's not like we're going to try to force all police departments across the state to implement all of this.
I understand.
It's going to allow us to focus on certain things like providing sufficient psychological services. I think that is like a numero uno in my book.
I understand what you're saying, but should it get passed widely, I think we maybe should do this. I just question the affordability, that's all. And I think that needs to be at least in the mix of the discussion.
Lori, I think that what you're saying is, correct me if I'm wrong, that we take a position and support moves towards enacting these positions. The paying for it, however, is something that legislators and municipalities, et cetera, are going to have to address. And that is not our role to get involved in the financial aspect.
Right. Yeah.
I think we are being very, I think that's not what I would like to see passed. I somehow believe when you're dealing with good suggestions like this, we are going to have a number of people who will say, well, we can't afford to do that. And in many cases, that's true. And I think to lobby for something that, as much as it's needed, is going to be not able to be provided, I don't believe in that. I guess that's the bottom line.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so that's all for the incarceration.
May I interrupt for a minute?
Whoops,
This is
sure.
Kate.
Yeah.
I just wonder if we're talking about prison, we're talking about a state-run system, not a local county jail. So the financing becomes the state's issue, I think, not the local. Or are you talking about the correctional officers if even that is, quite often funded or sub-funded by the state?
Right, and I mean, the bottom line is if they introduce legislation, then with this comprehensive position, we can look at it and see if it works within what we want and then lobby for it. And when we're lobbying for it, we can always lobby saying, cover the cost of it, don't pass it on to the, individual municipalities, or, like if it's coming from the governor and he's, so it's not like it's precluding us from bringing that up should it happen, a lot. I would say that many of these items are already done on some level, in our prisons, and it's really sort of stressing it more.
Well, and I think it's important to realize that a position is really aspirational, that we are trying to get to these things. I also want to say to Terry, though, that many of these things, like shorter sentences, will actually save money, so that there is a discussion about what the whole fiscal impact would be if we were to adopt all these things. I mean, we know that in some states, they charge the prisoners for their food. We know that they charge them room and board. So they never can get out because they have these debts. So
I'm not talking about the provisions which in the end will save money, lives, and a lot of other things. I was talking about other provisions.
Yeah, and I want to add to what Barbara was saying. If we start minimizing or reducing incarceration rate, we're going to wind up saving money that will help offset these additional services, which pretty much start up. So I think that will cover some of the financial costs of training and evaluation. Just get people out of jail sooner and better and whatever in the proper places. And we will save money.
Definitely. Okay, let's see if this switches. There we go. All right, the details of the re-entry category. Collaborate with community-based organizations to facilitate reintegration of people released from prison. Provide pre- and post-release programs inclusive of probation services to prepare as well as assess and address the needs of people re-entering the community. Remove technical violations of parole as a reason to return to an individual to prison. That's a huge one. I've just realized recently. And then general. Standardize data and setting up systems so that information can be easily shared among criminal justice agencies. Rely on evidence-based research and decision-making about criminal justice programs and policies. So that is the complete position. California does the position in brief, the categories, and the details. That's the complete position rate ending right there. And I mean, in my view, it's very comprehensive, yet broad enough to allow for changes that may come about. Now, I guess I should stop and ask if there's any questions or comments right now, and then I'll go over the reminders here.
Yeah, I would like to comment. There was a movie by, I think it's Michael Moore, what country are we going to invade next? I don't know if anybody saw it, and it had to do with countries that have far more advanced positions on education, et cetera, et cetera. One of them is prison reform. And the key word here is non-violent offenders. And some countries work really hard to make prisoners ready to come back as productive citizens of the community. And it was really amazing to see how these people are treated, not as punishment, but as reform, and getting the education, the training, and skills to become active citizens of the community. And just the difference between re-entry, reform, and punishment. And ours is very puritanical. If you did something bad, now we have to punish you, instead of trying to help you become a good factor in the community. So, and the other thing I'd like to say is that to get the police involved in this, the term that I heard many years ago, ownership. It would be really good to have the police themselves come in and say, what can we do to become better? And not just talk at them, but with them and from them. And I think it might be more positive results. That's it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that conversation has already begun because of the governor's executive order. It forced communities across the New York State to look at the police reforms and meet with people and talk. And I mean, Saratoga County, we had a session that we looked at what the task force recommended. And I mean, police and mental health providers and civil rights people all came together in the same room to talk and listen to each other. So I'm really excited about what's happening across New York State right now with the conversation. All right, so these are the reminders about the process. So the proposed convention rules will be adopted at the opening plenary session on Friday. And then in those proposed convention rules, proposals for concurrence are debatable but not amendable. Adoption of the program takes place on Saturday at the plenary. Sally Robinson from the League of Women Voters of New York will make the motion for the criminal justice position. And since it's part of the board recommended program, the concurrence vote only requires a majority. And we will need to line up speakers who are ready to speak in favor after the motion is moved. So I'm hoping that people, even on this call, will be interested in doing that.
However, you must be a delegate to the convention, not
Right,
just a visitor.
right. They have to be delegates. So what I have next is I have a pro and con. California didn't provide a pro and con because they don't require a pro and con for their positions. New York State does require that. So Barbara and I wrote up a pro and con. And then I have a few comments that I mentioned earlier that we got from other leagues. And then I also have information on the League of Women Voters California Criminal Justice Committee and a film that, well, Barb and I both saw it that I highly recommend. So I'll get to that in a second here. Okay, so this is what Barb and I came up with for pro and con. Pro, the League of Women Voters US has already signed on to a letter endorsing many of these points and calling for action to address them at the federal level. We need policies for the state and local level. People are outraged at the systematic racism that has been shown to exist within our policing and justice system, and this position provides principles for league action. The league's DEI policy dictates that we take action to remedy racism wherever it occurs. Con, state and local police agencies already have enough constraints on their actions. Without the expectation that the police will use force to enforce their orders, interventions to stop crimes in progress will be less effective. Judges, probation and parole officers, and the corrections establishment are already well equipped to make judgments for the public safety. It's always hard to come up with cons. But those are the pro and con that we submitted with the materials to the New York State. All right, so a few comments and updates. I learned when I attended the California Criminal Justice Committee meeting earlier this week, that Arizona, North Carolina, and Michigan have already adopted the position at their conventions. And then, as I said earlier in this presentation, 13 local leagues and the New York State Board recommended the concurrence. There were two concerns brought to our attention by Rivertown's league. First, they felt that civil service regulations made it difficult to hire diverse staff and suggested that the position should include a call to change civil service laws. As a reminder, the position states, staff police departments to reflect the diversity of the communities they serve and establish recruitment efforts that reflect this principle. In our view, the position does not need to specify how to accomplish this goal. Whenever you get into specifying things, you kind of dig yourself into a hole sometimes. It's always better to be broad. We don't think it's necessary to specify how to accomplish the goal of diversifying. Then the second issue was the need to retain solitary confinement for safety reasons, and the position says to abolish solitary confinement. I did a little research, and actually what's being used now is called protective custody, not solitary confinement. Those inmates who may pose a risk to their own or another's safety and security may be placed in what is referenced as protective custody. Protective custody may be voluntary if the offender is asking for this protection from the general population. It may also be involuntary when administration deems an offender as unable to be housed safely from the general prison population. Temporary segregation is, quote, immediate isolation of an inmate from the general prison population which most likely results from some form of crisis and is usually for 72 hours or less. And this was from impacts of and alternatives to solitary confinement, a report that was done. So I think that we have solutions for protecting people by using protective custody, not solitary confinement. And then I wanted to just talk a little bit about the Criminal Justice Committee in California. They meet on the 4th Tuesday of every month. And on their criminal justice reform page, they say, quote, "It is our committee's goal to encourage everyone to reform the criminal justice system through education and advocacy." And they have listed for the California public, they have information page. Then they have information for the California local leagues and members, a toolkit they've provided. And then they have leagues and members outside of California. They have the National League Engagement page. So that goes to LWVUS page. It's a fabulous website, and they're a very active committee and really working to achieve that goal that they have. They meet every month and they invite everyone to come. When I emailed them, I just emailed them to let them know that we were bringing this forward at our convention, and I was immediately invited to attend their committee meeting. And it just lucked out that it was happening that week. So I did attend, and they also sent me the this film that their local leagues had all watched, this documentary called Racially Charged: America's Misdemeanor Problem. And it's available on YouTube. You don't have to pay for it. It's a 32-minute film. And I highly recommend it. It is eye-opening about the legacy of white supremacy and slavery, and how it's impacted our misdemeanor laws. I mean, it was just such an eye-opener, like all these vagrant laws and, you know, no loitering laws. They were created after the Reconstruction to be able to criminalize behavior, to be able to put men, in particular Black men, in prison so that they could get back their slave force again. And then it kind of just expanded from there. So I am really curious to look at what kind of misdemeanor laws we have on the books here in New York. And I mean, like what was said earlier, we just have to stop putting people in prison for these like minor infractions and then creating this like perpetual loop. It's just insane, but I highly recommend it.
Lori, it's Gail, and I watched when California was doing their event, because I was just really intrigued, and I looked at their website and it was amazing. But that movie was so difficult. And this is after watching the movie 13th. And on top of that, watching this. But it really is mind-blowing, and it's a hard thing to watch. But they have that split screen. This is the one with the split screen of the current situation in comparison to 100 years ago, just the similarities of the situations. And it would be really, really good. I guess what you're getting at here is the idea that there should be something like what's going on in California on the state page, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if this is passed, that we can't just like pass this concurrence and then, okay, we're done. I think we need to set up a committee that meets and actively works to change the criminal justice system. I mean, it's required of us from the DEI. You know, we're like talking about DEI. Well, this is like DEI with a capital DEI, you know? I mean, yeah, I mean, there's just, I'm curious. I mean, we changed our bail laws in New York, but then as soon as they were passed, they immediately tried to change them, and they did kind of change them, but I'm not up on all that. Diane, I'm gonna ask you to start doing some research. She's our research gal. But I mean, really, I don't know where you begin to look at like all the misdemeanor laws, but I mean, we really need to change our laws. We criminalize homelessness, you know? I mean, loitering, vagrancy. It's like, why are we criminalizing homelessness? It's unbelievable.
What was the percentage? Like 80-something% of people are in jail are in there for misdemeanors.
Yeah, it was really high. I think I actually might have jotted it down. Well, I wrote down that 75% are more likely to be locked up for blacks, are 75% more likely to be locked up for misdemeanors. And the thing is that, remember that one point it said, follow the money. It's an $80 billion business, the criminal justice in the United States, $80 billion. Ugh. Thankfully, we don't have private prisons in New York State. So we don't have to fight against that. We just have to make sure they don't ever get them. But
Lori, is that $80 billion both public and private systems that you're talking about?
In the documentary, it said that it's an $80 billion business. So that includes like
All of it.
what we said earlier, like that, in some states, like if you are given like house arrest, they let you leave the prison, but they put an ankle bracelet on you to keep track of you. They charge you for the ankle bracelet, and then they charge you a monthly fee. I think in New York State, we're one of the states that has ridiculous costs for people to call, to make phone calls. I think that's a private industry in New York State. It used to be. I haven't stayed up on it, and it's a crime. We're like, our position says work to keep connections with families, you know, and then you like make a private business that people are charging exorbitant amounts of money for people to make private phone calls when they're in prison.
Yeah, but that all goes back to the puritanical way that our justice system is distributed. It is very, very, not puritanical, that's not the word I mean, pejorative.
Well, and I mean, honestly, now I've really gotten into my head that it's really more about white supremacy than anything else. And that I've been completely convinced of that that's what it's all about, you know. So I think this is then just the last thing, is that really trying to get people to speak in favor of the position. And then I have all the terms. Were there any terms that I mentioned that people wanted to look at, or should I stop the sharing and we can see each other's pretty faces?
Lori, it's Diane. I didn't see any terms that, you only had 2 or 3 terms on there that maybe people don't know.
Yeah, it seemed like, I wasn't sure, this risk assessment tools, I added that because that's algorithmic tools designed to predict a defendant's future risk for misconduct. And these predictions inform high stakes judicial decisions, such as whether to incarcerate an individual before their trial. And these are like filled with bias. These things, you know, it's like, you wouldn't think they would be, but they are.
Are they also, Lori, are they also used parole?
Yeah. Yep.
Lori, could you go back one slide to the constitutional?
Policing.
I didn't know what that was.
Policing that operates within the parameters set by the U.S. Constitution, state constitutions, the body of court decisions that have interpreted and spelled out in greater detail what the text of the Constitution means in terms of the everyday practice of policing. The police policies and practices that are most often the subject of investigations for unconstitutionality include police use of force and implicit bias.
Thank you.
Mm.
Where are these definitions so we can look them over?
I think that did we get everything on our website? I actually have to put the more updated ones because I added 2 to this, but I think it's on our website under, remind me, Barb, it's under, what?
I think it's in, when you go to about and then member resources, I think.
Yeah, I think it's under positions. We updated the healthcare information and put it on there, and we put this on there.
Right.
Well, where did you get it, Lori, in the first place here?
The terms were part of the California,
Okay,
their reform page. They had terms.
okay.
So I just copied and pasted those, and I removed one that was specific to California, and then I added 2 that I thought needed to be defined.
So you said that this particular group adapted and it's on your, under about?
No, as it turns out, it's under positions, which,
Yeah,
let
it's
me
under positions.
go to our website, right?
Now, is there anything else anybody wants to look at, or can I stop the share?
Stop the share.
Stop the share!